Washington agriculture is great. It accounts for upwards of $51 billion of value to the economy, with over 160,000 people employed annually. We rank as top producers in 10 commodities at the national level. Yeah, some might say we play the game of agricultural production pretty darn well.
There's a new player on the scene, however. A player who doesn't necessarily play by the traditional rules of the game. It's a player who generates upwards of $4 million a day in gross revenue. A player who accounts for almost $1 billion in tax revenue. It's a player whose potential benefits on Washington's economy are immense.
This player is cannabis, pot, dope, weed, or marijuana. Whatever name you know by, or whatever history or experience you may have with it, by all outward appearances, it looks like legalized recreational marijuana is here to stay, making Washington even greener than the evergreen state already is.
Now, I suppose some might argue that the business of marijuana is not agriculture, and if that's you, you're not alone. Even within Washington state, government organizations can't agree. But for the sake of this presentation, let's all agree that planting a seed, or start a cutting, culturing it to grow, harvesting the plant, processing it into a usable form, developing a market, transporting it to that market, even making it to a food product, and utilizing a retail outlet for consumers to purchase, pretty much looks like agriculture.
Proponents of this budding industry make strong arguments that legal marijuana has the potential to add millions of dollars to a struggling state budget. Additionally, supporters believe that cannabis can grow local economies by providing much-needed employment opportunities. And finally, once cannabis goes mainstream, many will finally realize the health benefits consumers have kept quiet for decades.
Opponents, however, doubt the potential economic benefits and argue that a legal platform for a federally banned substance will only blur the lines between right and wrong. They also protest that the potential harm a Schedule I drug can have on local residents far outweighs any perceived benefits. And at last, any regulation and enforcement of this new industry is all but impossible.
So, let's ask the audience this. Is Washington's legal cannabis economic high times, or is it going to be a great idea up in smoke?
In 1937, the United States enacted the Marijuana Tax Act, which began the process of placing marijuana on a list of federally banned substances alongside heroin. And so began a long string of federal actions and an ongoing war on drugs that many argue is simply unwinnable.
At the same time, while illegal marijuana continued to be used by many Americans, legislation for the legal use of medical marijuana found its way onto the scene and was passed by Washington voters in 1998.
Fast forward 14 years. In 2012, Washington state voters passed Initiative 502, which left Washington one of only 2 states pending the legalized use of recreational marijuana. And so began a hazy whirlwind of legislation, social activism, opposition, and support for legalized recreational use in Washington.
So let's get to the numbers, some really big numbers. Exclusively on an economic basis, the audience needs to know just how significant a contribution the legal cannabis trade has to the state economy.
Marijuana is taxed at a 37% rate at the retail level. This accounts for upwards of $730 million in generated tax revenue that goes directly towards the state. Close to 90% of the taxes are dispersed between only 4 government organizations. Nearly half of the taxes go to the Basic Healthcare Trust Fund, which accounts for about $356 million per year.
Right, Heather. To continue, the state's general fund contribution accounts for about $211 million. The vast majority of these dollars take a large swing at covering the cost of the Cleary decision, which mandates the state to fully fund public education.
Right, girls. So the bulk of the remainder goes to the Department of Social Health Services and the Healthcare Authority for prevention and treatment, as well as funding community health and dental care centers.
Not to mention all of the local business revenue that is connected directly to the operation of production and processing operations. Add in a labor force of employment to this labor-intensive crop, and you've got a juggernaut of a production system to boost local, county, and state economies.
Those are impressive numbers, girls. Not only would we be remiss in ignoring the significant contribution to the state tax coffers, but we would be insensitive to the good those government and community organizations do for the residents of Washington state. But proponents, let's get completely transparent on this. Those big numbers you were using were initial 502 legislative designations. We could contend that not only are they inaccurate today, but pretty misleading in general.
Many don't know that after 2 years of any Washington state initiative, it can be modified or changed without voter approval. Remember $30 vehicle license tabs? Well, Initiative 776, passed in 2002, did just that, but not for long. Legislators have found ways to modify this initiative over the past 15 years, where my parents now pay upwards of $90 for my cruddy little Toyota.
Speaking of cruddy, that's what's happening with 502 tax allocations to this state. Voters in Washington voted in 502 with some very specific allocations promised. And guess what? Legislators did not hold up their end of the deal. The general fund, Governor Inslee's slush fund of undesignated dollars, is currently receiving about 50% more than originally allocated. Prevention, treatment, and research is currently receiving about 50% less than originally promised.
Okay, guys, let's just agree to disagree about the specifics of the economics. It's clear that cannabis has potential to generate billions to the state tax base and local economies. How that gets distributed is another issue. What about the opponents' accusations about impacts on communities?
Chloe, our primary concern is cannabis's increased availability to youth. The effects of cannabis on the adolescent brain are scary, to say the least. A 2014 study by Lancet Psychiatry identified that the effects of marijuana on a young brain are significant. Teenagers daily using marijuana are 60% less likely to complete high school, 7 times more likely to attempt suicide, and 8 times more likely to try other drugs.
Yikes, Andrew. That's almost as scary as my 8-mile commute to school in my cruddy Toyota. But on a serious note, teen users are simply more likely to become addicted to marijuana, have an increased risk of marijuana-induced psychosis, and even schizophrenia. Most concerning, however, is the potential development of permanent impairment of cognitive functions.
That's nothing to joke about, Whitney. As a high school athlete, I don't need any more hurdles on my way to making the honor roll list or winning a state medal on the wrestling mat. Marijuana affects the brain. It alters memory, judgment, and motor skills. Easy to access, retail distribution of cannabis gives more of an opportunity to have me make decisions that has the potential to forever impact my life.
Colton, you're missing the point here. We're not advocating or discouraging the use of marijuana. That's a decision that as an adult will have to be made by everyone on this team or in the audience. We are simply stating the facts, and the fact of the matter is that marijuana does have the potential to do good. It has been used to treat a wide variety of symptoms and conditions. These include soothing the tremors caused by Parkinson's disease, relieving the side effects from victims of PTSD, as well as stabilizing your metabolism. Additionally, marijuana can also be used to treat glaucoma, epileptic seizures, and ease the pain of multiple sclerosis. In fact, Colton, the Food and Drug Administration has publicly endorsed the first marijuana-based medicine, Epidiolex, a godsend to pediatric epilepsy patients, and was released for public use last June.
That's right, Heather. Initiative 692 made medical marijuana legal in Washington state in 1998. Since then, over half the states have followed suit. Centuries of research and testimony of users support cannabis as a cure for severe pain and has been used overseas for just that. We can't deny the scientific research that backs the pain-stopping power it provides.
Marijuana has been found to have chemicals within it that prevent the spread of cancer. The natural chemicals lying within have been shown to slow the progression of Alzheimer's disease, as well as inflammatory bowel disease. Among the hundreds of chemicals found within marijuana, 2 are primarily responsible for the analgesic and anti-inflammatory effects. THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, which goes to receptors in the brain causing the psychoactive effects, and CBD, cannabidiol, which goes to different receptors throughout the body, easing pain and inflammation without the psychoactive effects.
So, opponents, how can you stand there in opposition to the beneficial uses of marijuana as a medicine? Obviously, you've never watched one of your loved ones fade away into someone you can't even recognize anymore due to Alzheimer's. So, if you can tell me without a tear in your eye that the benefits far outweigh any potential risks, I don't think we have anything else to talk about.
Easy there, Heather. I don't think the opponents are heartless. I think it's a matter of perspective. Retail distribution allows people to access cannabis over the counter if they choose to do so, regardless of purpose. I'd hope that both sides can see the significant impact increased access to marijuana can have.
Chloe, always the peacemaker. And in regard to keeping the peace, let's talk about the complexity of enforcement and regulation. Since marijuana is still considered a Schedule I narcotic by the federal government, there are some very strict regulations attached to it.
You've got that right, Colton. Essentially, the Obama administration gave states free rein on how to manage recreational marijuana. President Obama said in a Rolling Stone interview, "I do believe treating this as a public health issue the same way we do with cigarettes and alcohol is a much smarter way to go about it." All this right before his exit from the White House. Adding to the complexity of a change in administration was a new Attorney General, conservative Jeff Sessions.
Exactly, Andrew. He's been quoted as saying, "I've never believed we should legalize marijuana." And until last January, was also unclear on how he was going to deal with the states that have changed their marijuana policies. But what he has done is utilize a 2013 federal document called the Cole Memorandum to drive most of his decision making.
The Cole Memo, which drives enforcement regulation in Washington State. It simply states what can and cannot be done in regards to legalized marijuana. Some of these parts include the prevention of distribution to minors, the prevention of association with criminal enterprises, as well as prevention of distribution across state lines.
It continues with further preventionary measures in regards to preventing illegal trafficking, preventing violence in the production and distribution of marijuana, preventing impaired driving or any other public health issue, as well as preventing growing, using, or possessing on federal properties.
That brushes with a pretty broad stroke, but seems awfully straightforward, even logical. Proponents, how can you argue against those points?
We don't, Chloe. As producers, processors, or retailers, we understand that we are walking a very thin line as we balance between state regulation and federal prohibition. We get it. It's part of the game we're willing to play. But understand this. In between the lines of that Cole Memo is a lot of gray area. We proponents support these points, but it's difficult to navigate regulation and enforcement protocols that change almost daily.
Hard to hit a moving target, right, Heather? Every single producer that we interviewed in our research has identified that working with the Liquor and Cannabis Board has been the most challenging aspect of their operation. And in an industry that's remained in infancy, being sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed is all but impossible.
No doubt, Sammy. Even the LCB admits that they struggle to get it right. They receive almost daily directives from the states and feds that drive, change, or modify how they work with industry partners.
The Cole Memo, while important, creates unique challenges that no other agriculture producer has to deal with. From production practices to traceability to security to transportation to finances, it's an endless roll of red tape. And while most producers want to be in compliance, it's difficult.
It's clear to me that there is much more to this argument than we have time for. So let's summarize arguments on both sides. Opponents of a legal recreational cannabis trade in Washington State claims that it stands to do more damage than it does good.
We contend that legally it's a sticky situation, to be caught between a federally prohibited substance and a statewide free market.
Additionally, we stand by the concern that marijuana has proven negative effects upon the adolescent brain. And with a readily available retail supply, the occurrence of underage use has the potential to impact an entire generation of youth.
And at last, any regulation and enforcement proves to be more challenging than state resources can provide.
Thanks, opponents. Proponents, however, stand firmly rooted in the idea that a legal cannabis trade in Washington State, while challenging at times, stands to be a beacon of financial hope for a struggling state economy.
Not only that, Chloe, but a retail market will make cannabis easier to access for its medicinal purposes by the general public.
Right, Shay. And in regards to the financial possibilities, it'd be hard to turn down the potential billion-dollar contribution that retail cannabis can provide.
And at last, as the industry matures, it will be the standard that all other states look to for logical, efficient, and effective regulation and enforcement protocols and procedures.
Audience, the decision is yours. Is Washington's legal cannabis economic high times, or is it going to be a great idea up in smoke? Thank you. Are there any questions?